and welcome back to Pass the Torque. I'm your host, Katie Kadri. This week we have a very special guest for you, NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine. He's here to talk to you about all things Artemis. Let's go ahead and jump in with the first question. What does a NASA Administrator do?
So the NASA Administrator on any given day is working with international partners, working with our congressional supporters in both the House and the Senate, working with the National Space Council and the Office of Management and Budget. So on a day-to-day basis, I spend most of my time thinking about how are we going to get the resources necessary to achieve the objectives that we've been given to achieve. And of course, there's all kinds of other decisions and meetings that have to take place day in and day out. But it's interesting, in the pandemic, the amount of outreach that I'm able to do has gone up significantly just because I don't have to have face-to-face meetings. I'm not traveling to the various NASA centers. I'm not traveling internationally. Instead, all of the meetings are happening just like this, teleconferences. And so the amount of engagement and outreach I've been able to do has gone up significantly, even though we're in the midst of the pandemic. But at the same time, I would really like to be able to go visit people face to face as well. Obviously, the big things that we just recently accomplished, launching American astronauts again on American rockets from American soil, launching the Mars Perseverance rover, bringing our astronauts, Bob and Doug, back home. These are things that have required me to travel recently. So those are just some of the things that I do day in and day out.
Can you tell us about Artemis and what the different stages are?
Yeah, so the Artemis program is America's moving forward to the moon. I don't like to use the word return to the moon. We're going forward to the moon because under the Artemis program, we're going to stay. As much as we love Apollo, the problem with Apollo is that it ended. The Artemis program is a sustainable return to the moon. We're going to go with commercial partners. We're going to go with international partners. We're going to learn how to live and work on another world for long periods of time. And we're going to take all of that knowledge, we're going to use the resources of that world, in this case the moon, and then ultimately we're going to take all of that knowledge ultimately to put humans on Mars. That's the objective. When we think about the Artemis program, we need a number of different elements of it. We need a really big booster that can get our astronauts all the way to the moon. That's the SLS rocket. We need a capsule, the Orion crew capsule, that will take our astronauts to what's called the Gateway in orbit around the moon. And then from the Gateway, which is, think of it as a space station that's in orbit around the moon for 15 years, like a reusable command and service module, if you will, from the Apollo era, although this will be a 15-year capability. And then we need landers that can go back and forth from the Gateway to the surface of the moon over and over again, reusably. And so ultimately, if we can achieve each one of those elements, we're going to have a sustainable return to the moon. The key in all of this is driving down costs and increasing access for the sustainable return, or the sustainable going forward to the moon. And that's what the Artemis program is all about.
What is the rationale for going to the moon again?
So there's a lot of reasons to go forward to the moon. Just purely on the science side, if you look at it from a heliophysics perspective, the sun has been, sending subatomic charged particles into space for billions of years. And when it comes to the Earth, very few of those particles, most of the particles go around the Earth because of the magnetosphere around the Earth. When those particles do come in contact with the Earth, we have a very active geology, a very active hydrosphere, a very active atmosphere. And so none of those particles are today where they would have been billions of years ago. The moon does not have an active geology. It doesn't have an active hydrosphere. It doesn't have an active atmosphere. And so anything that impacted the moon billions of years ago is today right where it was billions of years ago. And that includes asteroid impacts, but it also includes subatomic charged particles, ions, from the sun, which means we can get a lot of data and information. It's a repository of the early sun. It's a repository of data and information of the early solar system. So we think about the moon as a place to go and get science of our solar system, the sun. We think of the moon as a place to go get astrophysics data. From the far side of the moon, we can actually see not just back to the first light in the universe after the Big Bang. But from the far side of the moon, it's so quiet from an electromagnetic spectrum perspective that we can see, in fact, all the way back to what we call the Dark Ages, before cosmic dawn. There was a period of time after the Big Bang, before first light appeared. We're going to be able to see that from the far side of the moon that we could never see any other place. So from a heliophysics perspective, from an astrophysics perspective, these are capabilities that I think are important for our agency to go and get. It's also important to note that because we're sending humans to the moon, we're going to have a communication architecture at the moon that makes these astrophysics missions even more valuable. Because there's a mission that I like to talk about called Dapper. And the idea is you're going to see the Dark Ages after the Big Bang, before the first light. That particular mission called Dapper would normally be a $500 million mission. But because we're already going to have a communication architecture at the moon, we can significantly reduce the payload. We can significantly reduce the power requirements. We don't have to have a large aperture antenna. And all of a sudden, the mission goes from $500 million down to $90 million. So it's about heliophysics. It's about astrophysics. It's about human exploration. The moon also we know, you've heard me talk a lot about the fact that there's hundreds of millions of tons of water ice on the south pole of the moon. Water ice is life support. It's air to breathe, it's water to drink, and it's also hydrogen, which is rocket fuel, and it's available in hundreds of millions of tons on the moon. So when we think about, why is it important to go to the moon? There's so much science and capability that we can, the discoveries that we can make. It's also a way of doing Earth science. A lot of NASA scientists would tell you, and they're right, that the moon was at one time a part of the Earth. And so we can actually learn a lot about the early Earth by going to the moon.
What are the biggest challenges of going forward to the moon?
So, there's no shortage of challenges when you talk about going to the moon. Sustaining life off the planet is difficult. We're going this time in a way that we've never gone before, sustainably. We want to be able to live and work on another world for long periods of time. So creating the ability to use the resources of the moon to live and work is a big challenge. And that's going to require a lot of power. It's going to require habitation capability. We're going to have to better understand human physiology. A lot of radiation there in deep space. When you get onto the surface of the moon, you actually cut the radiation in half, just by definition. When you're in space, you're getting radiation from all sides. But when you're on the surface of another planetary body, you're getting radiation only from, up. So when we think about the challenges of going to the moon, certainly spaceflight in general is difficult. Surviving off the planet for long periods of time is difficult. Doing it on another world is another order of magnitude. But we're going to need to be able to protect the human physiology. We're going to need large amounts of power. And of course, we're going to need habitation capabilities. And if we can master all of these things, we're going to be in good shape.
What does it mean to be the Artemis generation?
So I'm the first NASA administrator in history that was not alive when we had people living and working on the moon. My whole generation has missed out on that amazing achievement. Now, I remember watching in elementary school, our teachers bringing in the TVs and having us watch Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walk on the moon. But the last moon mission was in 1972, and I was born in 1975. So I never got to see any of this real time. We have failed my generation. And what we have to do is we have to make sure that we don't fail another generation. We need to make sure that from this point forward, we've had astronauts living and working on the International Space Station now for 20 years in a row. The question is, that demonstrates an amazing amount of success, a sustainable program that can last into the future, that we can build upon. We can learn and iterate experiments, technology, development capabilities, and science. The question is, can we create that kind of success for sustainability at the moon? I think the answer is absolutely yes, we can. We've got the budget requests now to achieve it. We've got bipartisan support in the House and the Senate. And for the first time since 1972, right now, for the first time since 1972, we have a human landing system funded to go to the moon, and we have 3 human landers that are under development. That hasn't happened since 1972. So amazing progress. We're very excited about it, but this is the Artemis generation. The other thing that's unique about the Artemis generation is if we go back to the Apollo generation, as much as we love Apollo, in those days, all of our astronauts came from fighter pilot backgrounds or test pilot backgrounds. And in those days, there were 0 opportunities for women. And so under the Artemis program, Artemis in Greek mythology is the twin sister to Apollo. She was the goddess of the moon. And so this time when we go to the moon, we go with all of America. We go with a very diverse, highly qualified astronaut corps that includes women. And we go under the name of Apollo's twin sister. Her name is Artemis. And this time when we go, we're going to stay.
In what ways do you think servicing, assembly, and manufacturing play into the sustainable model of space exploration?
So when we think about the servicing of satellites in space, even robotic repair of satellites in space, this could have a transformational impact for a lot of the challenges that we have. Number one, it's extremely expensive to launch a satellite. And if every time, if you launch a $500 million satellite to geostationary orbit and it comes to the end of its useful life, basically the process is to super sync it. You send it into deeper space and you just get it out of the way, but it never comes down. So you've got a $500 million asset floating around in space that is now basically space junk. Well, if you could resurface that same satellite, and in fact, keep it alive for another 10 years or 20 years. Number one, it saves a lot of money. And number two, it doesn't become junk. It doesn't become debris. So, I just gave an example of a $500 million satellite in geostationary orbit. But you can apply that, of course, to low Earth orbit, which is what OSAM-1 is all about. Basically servicing a Landsat satellite. Now, in low Earth orbit, we've got these constellations that are being developed right now that are thousands of satellites big. And that's going to result, whether we like to admit it or not, it will result in lots of space debris. A lot of those satellites are not going to work. Depending on their altitude, they could be in orbit for years or even decades, depending on what altitude those satellites happen to be living at. So it's important for us to say, number one, how do we save the resources of the American taxpayer? How do we save the resources of people who are providing internet broadband from space? Historically, that's been done in geostationary, but now that's moving down into low Earth orbit. How do we mitigate space debris? How do we prevent these satellites from becoming space junk that can result in collisions? And of course, collisions result in breakups, which result in more collisions. So this is a big part of space sustainability, but it's also a big part of driving down the costs so that ultimately we can get more benefit from space. Right now, it's the U.S. government that's pushing forward on this, but eventually we want to see a number of companies that are taking the technologies developed at the Goddard Space Flight Center under the OSAM program, take those technologies, license them, and create fleets of robotic repair capabilities that can all be launched into space to preserve satellites for the duration. So I think it's meaningful for just the economics in the long term, but it's also meaningful to prevent debris.
What was the significance of the first American launch of humans from American soil since Shuttle? How did you feel that day?
I remember back in 2011 when the last shuttle flight flew. And I remember thinking that we're going to be flying again here in a year or two. And time just kept going on. And the budgets weren't materializing to achieve commercial crew successfully. And things got dragged out. And here we were 9 years later without a human spaceflight capability. So what this really does for us is it opens up opportunities from an international perspective. Nations around the world want to partner with the United States of America. Nations that are not part of the International Space Station program want to join in our effort, whereas before they were looking at other countries and wanting to join the efforts of other countries. So this really puts us back in a position of leading again. It also gives us more access with more people to the International Space Station. So the amount of time spent on science and technology development capabilities, all of that crew time, it's going up, threefold or fourfold. And so all of that is beneficial to ultimately achieving longer duration stays in space and ultimately going to Mars. So having that capability is critically important. I want to be clear. That's just one half of the commercial crew program. Boeing is the other half of the commercial crew program. We need, in America's space program, we need dissimilar redundancy. We need the ability to have two providers. So if one has a setback, the other one can continue to go forward. We don't want to go a day in this country where we don't have access to space with humans, which is why we need dissimilar redundancy where the providers are not using the same supply chains. And in fact, very, very different ways of getting to low Earth orbit and getting to the International Space Station. So it has been successful. We're excited about where we are. We've got a lot of work to do, but ultimately we have the ability to have dual redundancy with two providers.
What are your thoughts on NASA's role in the world and relationship with international partners?
I really believe NASA as an agency is an amazing tool of diplomacy, and it opens channels of communications and relationships that otherwise would not exist. We think about the Science Mission Directorate. We have over 700 active agreements with nations all around the world within the Science Mission Directorate. We think about the International Space Station. We have 15 nations that have been operating the International Space Station now for over 20 years. We have we've had astronauts from 19 different countries. So and now, when we go to the moon under the Artemis program, we had a forum before the pandemic. We had a forum at the International Astronautical Congress, and I invited heads of agencies from around the world to come and share with us, if they'd like to be a part of the Artemis program. We had 26 nations come. Some nations didn't even have a space agency, but they still sent representatives to the meeting because they want to have a space agency. We're seeing countries like Australia and the United Arab Emirates and Luxembourg that are showing up and saying, hey, we not only want to be part of the Artemis program, we want to be a specific, relevant factor in the success of having humanity move off the planet to the moon and eventually onto Mars. So I think it's really uniting, and it's not just uniting the nations, which I think is cool. We get bipartisan support. Republicans love what NASA is doing. Democrats love what NASA is doing, and so we look at some of the challenges in the nation right now. NASA is this bright, shiny object that says, hey, when we work together, we can achieve amazing things. And we've got that strong bipartisan support right now.
What has been your favorite experience since you became the NASA administrator? What are you most looking forward to?
My favorite experience is probably, it's got to be launching American astronauts. It was just an amazing opportunity. We had members of Congress and senators. We had half the cabinet there, the president, the vice president. The whole world watched. It united us for a moment in time where people could see America do something stunning in the midst of some very challenging times. So that I think has got to be the highlight of my time at NASA for sure. But there's a lot more to come. We look at the future. There's so much more to do. We're building the program to go to the moon and then on to Mars. And not only building, look, in the past, we've had a lot of rhetoric about going to the moon and onto Mars. Since 1972, nobody has funded it. Now we have the funding. And so it's very real. It's not just smoke and mirrors. It's very real. It's taken a lot of work. But this is going to be a sustainable program. And, I don't know, let's say 10 years from now, 15 years from now, if the Artemis program is still moving forward, and my daughter, who's now 12 years old, if she sees herself as having an opportunity to go to the moon, then we will have achieved success.
Have you always been interested in space and science? What path did you take to get to where you are today?
So you can see based on the pictures behind me that I was always interested in aviation. I grew up wanting to be a pilot. From my earliest memories, I wanted to be a pilot. When summer camps, I would do wind tunnel camps and those kind of things. That's really where my heart has been my whole life. When I got to Congress as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, I was on the Armed Services Committee, Subcommittee on Strategic Forces, which deals with all of our national security space capabilities. I was also on the Science Committee, Subcommittee on the Environment, which oversees NOAA, and 40% of NOAA's budget is space-based investment, whether it's understanding climate or understanding weather. And then when we think about the Space Subcommittee, I was on the Space Subcommittee as well, which oversees NASA. So it seems like no matter what I was dealing with in the House, I was always dealing with space issues. And at one point I got frustrated and I put together a very comprehensive space reform bill. We called it the American Space Renaissance Act. And the goal was, how does the United States of America remain preeminent in space exploration and put us in a position to lead the world? I don't know really exactly how my name was given to the administration. I've heard a number of different directions that it might have come from. But when asked if I would be interested in that, I immediately said yes, not believing that this opportunity would ever arise. But I'll tell you, I think I have the best job on the planet, and I am grateful every day for this amazing opportunity. And the reason it's so amazing is because NASA is just filled with just such talented people that are doing such amazing work. And when a new discovery is made, for example, discovering that there's the methane cycles on Mars match the seasons of Mars, which of course increases the probability of finding life on another world, and being having a front row seat to those kind of discoveries is just amazing. When a 17-year-old intern discovers a planet orbiting, and I think this happened at Goddard, discovers a planet orbiting a binary star system, 1,300 light years from Earth. Those are the kind of things that, you just wake up in the morning, you're like, how do I have this amazing opportunity? I've just been so blessed.
What do you do for fun outside of NASA?
So I've got a 14-year-old boy, 12-year-old girl, and an 8-year-old boy. So I spend the preponderance of my time outside of NASA with them, generally doing the things that they do. My girl plays piano and she's a swimmer. My two boys are involved in lots of sports. Neither one of them have wanted to take up piano, but I can't control that. But I'll tell you, they take up the preponderance of my time. So being at home with my wife and kids is probably the thing that I spend the most time doing when I'm not working.
Thanks so much, Administrator Bridenstine. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of Pass the Torque. Don't forget to check back here next week for another brand new episode. See you then.
So you can see behind me here, you've got an F-18 on the wall. And then this is an E-2 Hawkeye. So these are the planes that I flew in the Navy. But a lot of people don't really know what an E-2 Hawkeye is all about. So this is a big radar on top, and it's used for detecting and tracking, the enemy, whether they're on the ocean or in the sky. This is a naval aircraft, so it takes off and lands on aircraft carriers. And we do command and control of a theater of battle. When we go into war, our troops are in contact with the enemy, and we're talking to them on the ground and making sure that they have the resources they need. The goal is to get the right bomb on the right target at the right time, so that our troops can continue to move forward and be successful in their mission. So it's a massive coordination effort that happens in this airplane. I had the opportunity to fly in Afghanistan back in 2002 and then in Iraq in 2003. And being a part of those missions was something that was a really big deal in my life. I had the opportunity to transition from the E-2 Hawkeye to the F-18 Hornet, which is behind me, and I flew at the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center, which is where that picture came from, and there I did red air for. I was a bad guy. I simulated enemy tactics, and I was a target, so I got shot down. I got shot down bravely, very frequently. But my job was to be a target for the Top Gun instructors that were transitioning from flying F-18s to F-16s, and so I had a great experience doing that. So the Navy was a big part of my life, and now NASA is a big part of my life.